He went to buy a cow, instead came back with an Apache bride who promised him love and a future. The man woke up before the sun, as he always did. The sky outside his small wooden cabin was still dark, and the air was cold enough to sting his lungs when he stepped outside. He stood for a moment, listening to the quiet land around him. There were no voices, no animals moving, only the soft sound of wind brushing against dry grass. Life on the frontier was lonely, but he had learned to accept it. Loneliness was better than hunger. His name was Elias, a man in his early 30s with rough hands and a tired face that showed years of hard work. He had come west with hope, like many others, believing the land would give him a better future. But the land did not give easily. It demanded strength, patience, and sacrifice. Every day was a test, and every mistake could cost a life. Elias owned a small piece of land, just enough to grow crops if the weather was kind. But the soil was dry, and the rains had been weak that year. His harvest was smaller than expected, and winter was coming fast. He needed milk, butter, and strength to keep going. That was why he needed a cow. One healthy cow could mean survival. Without it, he might not last another year. He packed his supplies carefully. A small sack of food, a water skin, a blanket, and the little money he had saved. It was not much, but it was all he had. He tied his horse to the fence and checked the saddle straps twice. The nearest trading post was far away, close to land known to belong to the Apache people. Many settlers avoided that area, speaking of it with fear. Stories traveled faster than truth, and fear grew larger each time it was shared. Elias had heard those stories too. He had heard people say the land was dangerous, that no one should travel alone. But he also knew stories were often shaped by anger and misunderstanding. He had never met an Apache person before. All he knew was that they had lived on this land long before settlers arrived. That thought stayed with him as he mounted his horse and began his journey. The road was narrow and uneven. Dust rose with every step the horse took. The sun slowly climbed into the sky, turning the land gold and red. Elias rode in silence, his mind focused on the task ahead. He thought about the cow he hoped to buy. He imagined bringing it home, building a small shelter for it, and finally having milk again. It was a simple dream, but simple dreams mattered most in hard times. As the hours passed, the land began to change. Trees became fewer, rocks more common. The air felt heavier and the silence deeper. Elias stayed alert, watching the horizon and listening for any sign of trouble. His hand often rested near his supplies, not out of aggression but caution. He did not want trouble. He only wanted to trade and return home safely. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered in the distance. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Elias frowned. A storm was coming faster than he had expected. The trading post was still miles away. He urged his horse forward, but the sky did not wait for him. Soon, rain fell hard, turning the ground into thick mud. Thunder rolled across the land, loud and sudden. The horse slowed, struggling to move forward. Elias realized it was no longer safe to continue. He needed shelter, or the storm could leave him injured or worse. He looked around, searching for anything that could protect him. That was when he noticed faint signs on the ground, tracks, carefully placed stones, and paths worn by many feet. This was not empty land. People lived here. His heart beat faster. Fear rose, not because he saw anyone, but because of everything he had been told. Still, the storm left him no choice. He followed the signs carefully, guiding his horse toward a group of low hills. There, hidden between rocks and trees, he saw shelters made of wood and earth. Smoke rose gently into the dark sky. He stopped at a distance, unsure what to do. The rain soaked his clothes and the cold crept into his bones. Turning back was impossible. Moving forward felt risky, but staying where he was would surely end badly. After a long moment, he dismounted and raised his hand slightly, showing he carried no threat. He stepped forward slowly. People noticed him quickly. Shapes moved between the shelters. Voices spoke in a language he did not understand. Elias felt every muscle in his body tighten. He did not move unless guided by calm gestures from one of the men who stepped forward. Their faces were serious but not cruel. They watched him closely, judging his intentions. Elias lowered his head slightly, a sign of respect. He pointed to the sky, then to himself, trying to explain the storm and his need for shelter. The men spoke among themselves. Time seemed to slow. The rain continued to fall, soaking everyone. Finally, one of them nodded and motioned for Elias to follow. Relief washed over him, though fear still remained. He followed carefully, aware that one wrong move could change everything. They led him to a sheltered area near a fire. The warmth felt like a gift. Elias sat where they indicated, keeping his movements slow and respectful. That was when he saw her. She stood a short distance away, watching quietly. She was not dressed like the settlers Elias knew, nor did she carry herself like the others around her. Her presence was calm but strong, like the land itself. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes held a depth that surprised him. There was no fear in her gaze, only curiosity and caution. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Elias looked away quickly, not wanting to seem rude. But he felt something shift inside him, something he could not explain. This was not attraction as he had known it before. It was recognition, a sense that this meeting mattered. As the storm continued, food was brought, simple but warm. Elias hesitated, unsure if he should accept. When he did, he nodded in thanks, placing his hand over his heart. It was a gesture he had seen others use. The woman noticed and gave a small nod in return. They did not speak, not with words. But the silence between them was not empty. It was filled with shared understanding. Two people from different worlds, both shaped by struggle, both trying to survive on land that gave little but asked for much. That night, Elias lay near the fire, listening to the storm fade into the distance. He thought about his cow, his farm, and the life he planned to return to. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman and the place he now found himself in. He realized that his journey had already changed, even if he did not yet know how. He had left home to buy a cow. But as he stared into the fading firelight, he felt that fate had carried him somewhere far more important than a trading post. Something had begun, quietly and without warning, and deep in his heart, Elias sensed that his life would never follow the simple path he had planned. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the land quiet and clean. Elias woke to the sound of soft voices and the crackle of a small fire. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the shelters, the people, and the woman who had watched him with calm eyes. He sat up carefully, making sure not to disturb anyone. The air felt fresh, washed by rain. Smoke rose straight into the pale sky. Around him, the Apache camp was already awake. People moved with purpose, not rushed, not loud. Children laughed softly near one shelter. An older man added wood to the fire. Everything felt balanced, like each person knew their place and their task. Elias stayed where he was, unsure what was expected of him. He did not want to offend anyone by moving without permission. After a short while, one of the men who had guided him the night before approached. He gestured toward a pot near the fire and handed Elias a wooden bowl. Inside was warm food, simple but filling. Elias accepted it with both hands and nodded in thanks. As he ate, he noticed the woman again. She was helping another woman prepare supplies. Her movements were steady and confident. She spoke quietly, her voice gentle but clear. Elias did not understand the words, but he felt their meaning in her tone. She carried herself with dignity, not pride, not fear. When she glanced toward him, Elias looked away, then back again, offering a small, respectful nod. This time she smiled slightly. It was not a wide smile, but it held warmth. That small moment eased something inside him. He felt less like a stranger and more like a guest. Later that morning, the men gathered nearby, speaking among themselves. Elias guessed they were deciding what to do with him. He stood when one of them motioned him forward. Slowly, carefully, he tried to explain his purpose. He pointed back toward the land he had come from, then made a shape with his hands, trying to show an animal with horns. He mimed milking, hoping they would understand. There were quiet reactions, some curious, some thoughtful. The older man listened closely. Then he spoke, using simple gestures of his own. He pointed toward the east, then shook his head slightly. Elias understood that the trading post was farther away and that travel might be difficult for now. Elias felt disappointment, but he did not show it. He nodded, accepting the situation. He had learned long ago that frustration solved nothing. He placed his hand on his chest and bowed his head, showing respect and gratitude for the shelter they had given him. The woman stepped closer then. She spoke to the older man, her words calm but firm. The man listened and then nodded. Elias noticed how the others respected her voice. She was not loud, but she was heard. That told him much about her place among her people. She turned to Elias and gestured for him to follow. He did so, keeping a respectful distance. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the land opened into a wide valley. She pointed to the sky, then to the ground, explaining through gestures that the land would be safe for travel later, but not yet. She mimed waiting. Elias understood. He nodded and pointed to himself, then made a sleeping gesture, asking if he could stay a little longer. She considered this, then nodded once. Relief filled him. He placed his hand over his heart again in thanks. The day passed quietly. Elias helped where he could, carrying water, gathering wood, following simple gestures. No one treated him with kindness out of weakness. It was shared work, shared effort. He respected that deeply. As the hours passed, he and the woman found small ways to communicate. She showed him plants, pointing to which were useful and which were not. He showed her how he repaired a loose strap on his saddle using a simple knot. They laughed once when he failed to copy one of her words correctly. The sound surprised them both. Her name, he learned slowly, was Ayana. She pointed to herself and spoke it clearly. Elias repeated it carefully until she nodded in approval. When she asked his name with a questioning look, he pointed to himself and said, "Elias." She repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. In the afternoon, they sat near the shade of a tree. The air was warm but not heavy. Elias took out a small item from his bag, a simple metal spoon he had carried for years. He showed it to her, explaining with gestures that it had belonged to his mother. He did not know why he shared this, but it felt right. Ayana listened quietly. Then she picked up a small object of her own, a carved stone tied with leather. She held it carefully, then placed it back against her chest. Elias understood. Some things were not meant to be explained, only respected. As the sun lowered, a sense of calm settled over him. For the first time in a long while, Elias did not feel alone. He was far from home, yet something here felt steady, safe. Not because there was no risk, but because there was honesty. That evening, as people gathered around the fire, Elias noticed how stories were shared. Faces lit by flame, voices rising and falling. He did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning, history, laughter, lessons passed from one generation to the next. Yana sat across from him. Their eyes met often, no longer by accident. There was no rush, no pressure. Just awareness. Elias felt something growing, slow and careful, like a seed finding water. Later, when the fire burned low, Ayana walked with him to where he would sleep. She pointed to the stars, then traced a slow path across the sky with her finger. Elias watched, realizing she was showing him direction, time, and movement. Knowledge shaped by years of watching the land. He was struck by how little he truly knew, despite all his effort to survive. And yet, here was someone willing to share without demand. Before leaving, she looked at him seriously. She placed her hand flat against the ground, then against her heart. Elias mirrored the gesture. In that moment, they made a quiet promise, not spoken, not written, but felt. A promise of respect. As Elias lay down to rest, he thought again about his journey, about the cow he had come to buy. It seemed far away now, almost small, not unimportant but no longer the center of his thoughts. He realized that waiting was not wasted time. Sometimes waiting allowed life to reveal a different path, and as sleep took him, Elias felt certain that this place, these people, and especially Ayana were now part of his story, whether he was ready for it or not. The land outside was silent, stars bright above. Somewhere between where he had been and where he was going, Elias felt his life shifting, slowly but surely, towards something he could not yet name but already trusted. Days passed quietly, one blending into the next. Elias had planned to leave after the storm, but the land seemed to ask him to stay a little longer. Each morning brought clear skies and calm air, yet something held him back. It was not fear. It was a feeling he could not easily explain, a pull that came from shared silence and small moments of understanding. He continued to help where he could. He learned the rhythm of the camp, when to work and when to rest. He watched how people respected the land, taking only what was needed and giving thanks for it. This way of life felt different from his own, but not strange. It felt older, wiser. Gianna was often nearby. Sometimes they worked together, sometimes apart. They spoke little, but they did not need many words. A look, a gesture, a shared task was enough. Elias noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how her eyes always watched the world carefully. She seemed strong, not in loud ways but in steady ones. One afternoon, the older man who seemed to lead the group called Elias over. He pointed toward the distant hills, then to the sky. Elias understood that it was time to move camp soon. Seasons were changing. Paths were shifting. Life did not stay still here. The thought of leaving settled heavily in Elias' chest. He had come with a goal and had drifted far from it. His money was still in his bag. His cow still waited somewhere beyond the hills. Logic told him it was time to go. That evening he sat alone near the edge of the camp, watching the sun sink low. The sky turned soft shades of orange and purple. Iana approached and sat a short distance away. They watched the land together in silence. After a while, Elias took a deep breath. He pointed toward the direction of his home, then made a walking motion with his fingers. He was telling her he would leave soon. Gianna's face remained calm, but her eyes changed. She nodded slowly, as if she had known this moment would come. She picked up a stick and drew lines in the dirt. She drew hills, then a path, then another path that crossed it. She pointed to one, then the other, asking him to choose. Elias looked at the drawing for a long time. He understood what she was asking. Life often offered more than one way forward. Elias pointed to the path that led home. Then, after a pause, he touched the crossing path too. Gianna watched him closely. She erased part of the drawing and drew a small shelter where the paths met. Then she looked at him, waiting. That night, Elias did not sleep well. His thoughts moved like restless animals. He thought of his empty land, his failing crops, and the long winters ahead. He thought of the people he had met here, their quiet strength, and the peace he felt among them. And he thought of Ayana, her steady presence, and the way she made him feel less alone in the world. Before dawn, Elias rose and stepped outside. The air was cold but clear. He walked until he reached a small rise overlooking the land. He stood there as the sun appeared, feeling the weight of choice pressing down on him. When he returned, Ayana was waiting. She seemed to sense his decision before he spoke. Elias knelt slightly and placed his bag on the ground. He opened it and showed her his money, his supplies, everything he owned. Then he closed the bag and pushed it toward her, a sign of trust. Ayana did not touch it at first. She looked at him carefully, as if reading something deeper than words. Then she placed her hand over his, firm and warm. She nodded once. Later that day, Elias was invited to sit with the elders. The air felt serious but not heavy. Gianna stood nearby, speaking on his behalf. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. She spoke honestly, without fear. The elders asked Elias questions using gestures and expressions. Could he work? Could he respect their ways? Could he be patient? Elias answered with action more than motion. He bowed his head, placed his hand over his heart, and waited. Time passed slowly. Finally, the oldest among them nodded. There was no celebration, no loud reaction. Acceptance came quietly like rain soaking into dry ground. That night, a small gathering was held. Food was shared. Stories were spoken. Elias felt both welcome and humbled. He knew this was not a reward but a responsibility. To stay meant to learn, to adapt, and to honor what he was given. Iana sat beside him. She did not smile much, but her presence felt warmer than the fire. When she placed a small woven band around his wrist, Elias understood it was a symbol of belonging. Not ownership, not control. Belonging. Days turned into weeks. Elias learned more of their language, slowly forming simple words. He learned where to walk and where not to. He learned the value of patience, of listening before speaking. Life was not easier, but it felt more meaningful. Yet not everything was calm. Word of movement in nearby lands reached the camp. Other settlers were pushing closer. Tension grew quietly. Elias felt caught between two worlds, understanding both fear and hope on each side. One evening, Ayana spoke seriously to him. She pointed toward the land he had come from, then to the camp, then to him. She was asking if he truly understood what staying meant. Elias met her gaze and nodded. He pointed to his heart, then to the ground beneath his feet. He was choosing where he stood. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Elias realized the hardest part was not leaving his old life behind. It was accepting a new one fully. Change demanded more than movement. It demanded courage. Yana looked up at the sky and traced the stars again as she had before. This time, Elias followed easily. He saw patterns now, paths written in light. He smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had come searching for survival. Somewhere along the way, he had found purpose. And though the future was uncertain, Elias felt ready to face it, not alone, but together. In the quiet between heartbeats, he knew this was the turning point of his life. The moment where the road behind him faded and a new one opened ahead. Life did not slow down after Elias chose to stay. In many ways, it became harder. Each day brought new lessons, and each lesson tested his patience. He was no longer a visitor. He was learning how to belong. The camp moved as the season changed. Elias helped pack supplies, take down shelters, and guide animals. His body ached in ways it never had before, but he did not complain. He knew effort was the only way to earn trust. No one treated him unfairly, but no one treated him gently either. Respect here was built through action. Iana stayed close, though she never guided him too much. She let him learn on his own, stepping in only when needed. Sometimes she corrected him with a look. Other times she showed him by doing the task herself, slow and clear. Elias watched carefully. He learned that pride could be dangerous. Listening mattered more than speaking. As they traveled, Elias noticed how deeply connected the people were to the land. They stopped at places that looked empty to him, yet others knew exactly where water could be found or where food could grow. The land was not just space, it was memory. Elias began to understand that surviving here was not about control, but cooperation. At night when the camp rested, Elias and Ayana often sat together near the fire. They spoke more now, using simple words and shared gestures. Elias learned how to say thank you properly. He learned how to ask before taking anything. Small things, but important ones. One evening, Elias shared more of his past. He spoke of his farm, the dry soil, the lonely days. He did not complain. He simply told the truth. Gianna listened quietly, her face thoughtful. When he finished, she spoke of her own life. She spoke of loss, of change, and of strength passed down through her family. Elias understood that pain was something they both carried, even if it came from different places. As weeks passed, Elias noticed tension growing among the people. messages arrived from other groups. There were talks around the fire that lasted late into the night. Elias did not understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. The world outside was shifting again. Settlers were moving closer. Roads were forming where paths once were. The land was changing. Elias felt the weight of this more than anyone else. He came from that world. He knew how quickly things could turn hard when fear took control. One day, the elders called him forward. The air was serious. Elias stood straight, his hands open. He did not know what they would ask, but he was ready to answer honestly. Through careful words and gestures, they asked him about his people, why they moved so fast, why they took so much. Elias struggled. There were no easy answers. He spoke of hunger, of fear, of dreams, of safety. He admitted that many did not understand the harm they caused. He did not defend wrong actions, but he did not lie either. The elders listened. Gianna stood beside him, her presence steady. When Elias finished, there was silence. Then one elder spoke slowly, with sadness rather than anger. Elias felt relief. Understanding did not mean agreement, but it opened a door. After that day, Elias felt the weight of his position. He was between two worlds. He could not change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. He decided to act with care, to be a bridge where possible. Work continued. Elias became stronger, more confident. His hands grew skilled in new ways. He learned how to repair tools using natural materials. He learned how to read weather signs in the sky. Each skill brought pride but also humility. Gianna and Elias grew closer. Their bond was quiet, built on trust. There were no grand promises spoken aloud. Instead, they shared effort, laughter, and concern for each other's safety. When Elias struggled with a task, Gianna encouraged him without shame. When she faced worry, Elias stood beside her without question. One afternoon, while gathering supplies near a stream, Elias slipped on wet ground and twisted his ankle. It was not serious, but painful. He tried to stand and failed. Frustration rose in his chest. He hated feeling weak. Gianna knelt beside him immediately. She examined his ankle carefully, her movements gentle but firm. She signaled for him to stay still. Others came to help, bringing support and bandages made from cloth and herbs. Elias felt a deep sense of care, not pity but concern. As he rested over the next days, Elias was forced to slow down. At first, this troubled him. He wanted to prove himself. But as he watched the camp move around him, he realized something important. Strength was not only in doing, it was also in trusting others. Gianna spent time with him during his recovery. They talked more than before. Elias practiced words and Gianna corrected him patiently. Sometimes they laughed at his mistakes. These moments brought lightness to days that could have felt heavy. During this time, Elias also noticed how Gianna was seen by others. They came to her for advice, for comfort, for guidance. She did not seek attention, but it followed her naturally. Elias admired her deeply, not just for her strength, but for her kindness. When Elias was able to walk again, he returned to work with renewed focus. He felt more grounded than ever. He no longer felt like he was trying to prove something. He was simply doing his part. One evening, as the camp prepared to settle for the season, a decision was made. The elders spoke of unity, of choosing peace where possible, and of preparing for change without losing identity. Elias listened closely. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he felt ready. That night, Gianna led Elias to a quiet place away from the fire. The sky was clear, stars bright above them. She held out a small woven piece carefully made. She placed it into his hands. Elias understood its meaning. It was not just a gift. It was a sign of shared future. Elias felt emotion rise in his chest. He placed his hand over his heart and nodded, unable to find words strong enough. He did not need them. The moment spoke for itself. As they stood together under the open sky, Elias reflected on how far he had come. He had set out to buy a cow, believing survival came from possession. Now he understood survival came from connection. The world around them remained uncertain. Change would continue. Challenges would come. But Elias no longer faced them alone. He had chosen a life of shared strength, shared responsibility, and shared hope. And in that choice he found something deeper than safety. He found belonging. The season slowly turned, and with it came change that could not be stopped. The land showed signs of both promise and challenge. New grass grew in some places, while other areas dried under the sun. Life moved forward, steady and uncertain at the same time. Elias now walked with confidence among the people. He no longer felt like a guest or a stranger. His steps matched the rhythm of the camp. He knew when to rise, when to work, and when to rest. The land that once felt wide and empty now felt familiar, almost like it was speaking to him in quiet ways. Gianna walked beside him often. Their bond had grown strong, not through loud words but through shared days and long nights. They trusted each other deeply. When one spoke, the other listened. When one struggled, the other stood close. Together, they had built something real. One morning, as the sun rose low and soft, the elders gathered the camp. It was time for an important decision. The world beyond their land was changing quickly. More settlers were moving closer. New paths were forming, and old ways were being tested. The elders spoke of the need to protect peace without losing identity. Elias listened carefully. He knew both sides of this growing distance. He understood fear, misunderstanding, and hope. When asked to speak, he did so honestly. He spoke of respect, of shared land, and of the danger of letting fear lead decisions. He did not promise easy answers, only effort and care. His words were received quietly. No one cheered, no one argued, but Elias saw understanding in their eyes. That was enough. Later that day, Gianna and Elias walked to a quiet place near the edge of the valley. The wind moved gently through the grass. Birds passed overhead. It felt like the land itself was listening. Gianna spoke softly. She spoke of the future, of change, and of choosing a life together. Elias listened, his heart steady and full. When she finished, he nodded. He spoke of commitment, of learning, and of staying true to the values they shared. There was no fear in his voice, only resolve. They returned to the camp hand in hand. The people noticed, but no one spoke. Acceptance here was shown through action, not words. That evening, food was shared and stories were told. Laughter rose into the night air. Elias felt a warmth he had not known before. Days passed, then weeks. Elias and Ayana worked side by side. They built a small shelter together, choosing a place that honored both her people's ways and his need for stability. It was simple but strong. Every part of it held meaning. Elias sometimes thought of the cow he had once traveled so far to buy. The memory felt distant now, almost small. He smiled at the thought. What he had gained was far greater than what he had planned. There were challenges, of course. Supplies were not always easy to find. Weather tested their strength. News from nearby lands brought worry. But through it all, Elias and Ayana faced each day together. They spoke openly, planned carefully, and supported one another. One evening, a group of travelers passed near the camp. They moved carefully, unsure of what they might find. Elias stepped forward calmly. He spoke with respect, showing no fear and no threat. Ayana stood beside him. Together, they showed that understanding was possible. The travelers left peacefully. The moment passed quietly, but it mattered. Elias realized then that his role was not only to belong, but to help others see beyond fear. That understanding gave his life deeper purpose. As time went on, Elias became known as someone who listened first and spoke with care. He did not try to lead, but others often sought his advice. He remembered where he had come from and stayed humble. That humility earned trust. Yana continued to be a source of strength and wisdom. Together, they supported the camp through moments of uncertainty. They taught children what they had learned. They shared stories, laughter, and lessons shaped by experience. One night, under a sky full of stars, Elias and Ayanna sat quietly near their shelter. The fire burned low. The world felt still. Elias thought about the road he had taken, the choices he had made, and the life he now lived. He realized something important. True survival was not about holding on to things. It was about letting go of fear and choosing connection. It was about respect, patience, and shared effort. Ayanna rested her head against his shoulder. Elias placed his hand over hers. No words were needed. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to face together. Years later, stories would be told about the man who went out to buy a cow and returned with something unexpected. Some would say it was fate. Others would say it was courage. Elias would say it was choice. He chose to see people, not stories. He chose to listen, not judge. He chose love over fear and patience over pride. And in doing so, he built a life rooted not just in land, but in understanding. A life where two worlds met and found balance. A life where the promise of love and a future was kept, not through words alone, but through every step taken together. As the fire faded and the night deepened, Elias felt at peace. The journey that began with a simple goal had led him somewhere far richer. He had found a home, a partner, and a purpose. And though the road ahead would always hold challenges, Elias knew one thing with certainty. He would walk it with strength, respect, and love, grounded in the life he had chosen, and grateful for the unexpected path that led him there.